Hi everyone.
Good morning, or I guess afternoon now. It is Thursday and we are live from the hive again. Today we are going to be pulling honey, but before we get started, I just want to let you guys know that this Saturday for our Better Beekeeping Business webinar series, Elise is speaking all about beekeeping and beekeeping education, or business and beekeeping education. We've also got our free mini course all about harvesting honey online up until the end of September. Our level 1 beekeeping course is also open for registration, and you can register for courses throughout the year.
Yeah, and that's at Nate.
At Nate, yes.
Yeah.
And then we also have our Master Academy on the third Saturday of September, Saturday, September 18th, with Renata Borba. And so I'll pass it off to Elise.
Hey everyone. So welcome to the apiary. It's a nice warm day for once. It's been cool lately up here and rainy, which is really lovely to see. So we're going to be pulling honey today. This will be in some hives the second pull, some of them the third pull of the year, but I'm going to show you different techniques in which you can pull honey off of hives and brush them off. So we cover some options through the bee course, like the free course that's online on our website right now. It comes to your inbox, you watch the video, do the activity sheet. But today I'm just going to show you some options that you can use. So let's do it.
Yeah, and if you have any questions throughout this live from the hive, feel free to drop them in the comments and we'll answer them.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to start looking at this big girl. So what happens when I've pulled honey already for the season? What I'll do is I'll pull my honey supers off in a way that I'll show here. I usually use brushing or tipping or bee escapes, which are the three options we're showing today. And what I'll do is then once I'm extracted them, I'll put them on wet back on top of my queen excluder, if I'm using a queen excluder on that hive or not. And then I see if they'll either clean up the cells or the combs and clean up the combs so it's nice and dry for me to put in storage for the winter. So if you're only doing one harvest, that's an option. Or I'll put it on in hopes that they'll backfill it an additional time. And so this is, in this hive in particular, this will be the third pull. So they have been plugging away into honey storage into this colony. So what I've done yesterday to this hive is what you would do, and this is a bee escape method. So it allows for you to then, if you're using a queen excluder, which bee escapes, you kind of have to use queen excluders, or you have to do a full hive inspection before install. So the bee escape would have been between these two upper supers and the two supers below, and I would have switched out the queen excluder to the bee escape. Because you never, ever, ever want brood above a bee escape because it won't work. Your nurse bees will always remain loyal to the brood. So if there happens to be, for some reason, open brood or capped brood in the upper chamber, you'll end up having very little success at the bees moving through the bee escape and having your upper chambers devoid of all bees. Now, the other thing about the bee escape is the upper entrance has to be closed as well. So let's have a look here at what we have above. Sorry. So we've got some bees up in the upper chamber. And we can have a peek here. So we're going to got some bees up here. So I'm always going to have a bee brush in order to get any of the bees left behind, but it's not full of bees, which is really great. I'm going to have a peek and see, did they pull any more honey? They did. So it's not fully ripened, but that's okay. We're going to see that it is the right moisture content when we're back at the honey house, but it is thick. It is viscous. It's not like it's fresh nectar. It's too dry. It's too late in the season for me to be expecting a fresh flow. So that's great. So I'm able to take these off. And if there are bees in it, you can bring out your leaf blower or your shop vac if you have an extension cord or a generator and put it on reverse. And you can just blow the bees out that are remaining in this upper chamber. But we know there's no queen up here. So here we go. If I go and I look in this box, if I tip this over, you can see there's not many bees inside. Can you make that out, Ashley?
Mm-hmm.
So there's not many bees inside. So I can just take this, put it in my truck, and walk away. And that's the nice thing about a bee escape. So this is a deep box. It's fairly heavy. So let's have a peek here too and see what the bees have plugged away in this upper chamber. After I extracted, put it back in, extracted, put it back in, extracted, and now for a third time, put it back in. And look, it's nice uncapped honey, but the moisture content, I'd be shocked if it was above 17%. So that's why a hydrometer, which I showed in the last live from the hive when we were doing extraction, is really important arsenal in your toolkit, so that you feel confident that you're not going to have your honey fermenting in the jars after you put all that work into extracting. So I'm going to take this above the bee escape, and I'm going to pull this off. So this is pretty full, but you can see there's not many bees inside this box. So you can blow or brush or just leave them. And then this is what a bee escape looks like. And what bees do, come over here closer, Ashley, to wasps when they try to rob. Can you make that out? They're attacking her, and looks like she killed that bee, but they are making sure that she does not survive. So I'll help them out. There you go. Okay. So a bee escape is basically a one-way tunnel. So the bees in the upper chamber can't exit out of anywhere, but the brood nest is below. So that's where the heat, the queen, the pheromone is. So the bees in the upper chamber can go down through this hole, and then they're met with a screen. And then once they get to the screen, they kind of go through this labyrinth underneath to get into the box below. And then the bees below aren't able to get to the upper chamber because they would have to enter through the labyrinth. So it's a really efficient way to decrease the amount of bees in the honey supers without having to brush or vibrate or bug the bees. But it only works if you are actively a participant in your hives on a regular basis, because you're going to want to install this 2 or 3 days before you're planning on harvesting your honey. Because if you're, say, having like 100 or 1,000 hives, these aren't cheap. I use discs in other posts that I have on Instagram, but this is like the wooden frames one. These are more common. They're like $20 a piece, and so if you have 100 hives, that adds up, and then it's more equipment to store. So commonly these aren't used in large scale operations. So there's always other options. So I'm going to go ahead and take all of this off. Now this hive, I would inspect it, make sure it's clean right, check on weight and volume, and then I would compress it for winter. Now, it is compressed now. We want a minimum of 7 frames of brood inside your colonies in the fall. Because there is an understanding that the size of your brood nest now is the size of your cluster in February. Because this is the time of year where your bees are producing Diutnus or winter bees. And these are the bees that are kind of stunted in their development or movement through worker bee caste system, from nurse bee to forager bee, that whole caste system. In the fall, the bees are fed a fatty diet. So they're called fat bees, Diutnus bees, winter bees. And that fat diet basically makes them have a protein deficient food, brood food fed to them by the nurses, which then makes them produce vitellogenin fats. So they're way more fatty bodied. And then in the winter, as they start to metabolize the fats, that vitellogenin in their body, the hormones produced actually suppress their movement in through the different castes. So they actually stay stunted in nurse bee mode, or kind of a dormant mode. And that's why winter bees can live 6 to 8 months of the year. So the population, the brood nest that you have now in your colonies, in your hives, in the prairies, as you're heading to winter, those are all going to be part of your winter bee population. So if you have a cluster size or brood nest of less than 7 frames, like say you had to requeen or something, you need to be a little bit concerned that they may not actually have enough bees to survive winter. Is there any questions?
No questions yet, but we have lots of people joining today. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. Hive and Harvest is here.
Hi, Giselle.
Hi, Giselle. She says, takeaway, minimum 7 frames of brood going into winter. Yes, that is
right.
Correct.
It's tough because you'll see a big recession in your brood nest this time of year. But it counts as capped brood, open brood, even if it's sporadically broken up between 15 frames. Say you got like half as honey, half as brood. You want to see kind of a statistical average of a total of 7 frames. And that's like 7 deep frames, so maybe a bit more in mediums if you're only running mediums or shallows, or even half sizes. You're going to want to make sure that you have a fairly large brood nest kind of wrapping up for the season. but not as big as you had a month ago, because you could have triple that size a month ago, because the queen is decreasing the amount of brood she's tending. So this is the bee escape method. I like this method. It works really good. Now another method is called a tipping method, and this is like for this colony here. So this is a method that you only, and I cannot impress enough, do when you are in a flow. So when I did my first honey pull in July, where the bees are pouring out full of nectar and pollen coming into the hive, I can then go into the hive, go above the queen excluder, grab the frames of bees, could be full of bees, tip a box like this, leave it for 2 or 3 hours, and come back and it'll be empty of bees. And the reason for that is that there is no brood in this box. If there's brood, the tipping won't work because they'll stay covering the brood. But all the bees in the upper supers tend to be foragers, and they're busy. So if you're pulling above a queen excluder, you tip a box, or even if you're not pulling above a queen excluder, but you're shaking off bees or looking through and consolidating honey, what you're going to find is the bees that end up in these upper chambers are foragers putting honey away. So they'll take off flying for foraging, and then they'll enter back into the hive. You cannot do that this time of year. As soon as you don't have a flow on, a nectar flow, pollen flow doesn't count, what you're going to have is robbing. And robbing can be devastating. I've had hives that I've tipped up, and for 2 or 3 hours later came back and over 1,000 pounds of honey was missing out of the boxes I tipped. It was all backfilled in the colonies in the apiary. So tipping doesn't work when you're in a dearth. Robbing looks like this. So this is a hive that has been robbed out. And, any questions about tipping? I wanted to ask real quick. If you have questions, please ask. I'm really happy to have one of the last few field days with you for the season. So robbing looks like this from the exterior. You can see this waxy residue. Do you see that there? This is typical of robbing. So this will be visible on equipment if you're just like I have a honey box that you leave out in your backyard, which you shouldn't do. And this is what's left behind by the honeybees. It comes off their legs. It's basically like this rough, waxy-like substance. So if we go into a colony that's been robbed, and so this colony had a queen excluder and 2 medium supers full of honey. I'm assuming full of honey. They're not full of honey anymore. And when I come in, this is what the frame looks like. And this is also classic of robbing or bees chewing out combs. So I've had people email me like, what is the white flakes? What is that? That's actually wax. So you can see the rough edges where the bees have taken down the wax and consumed it. Now another sign that your bees died of robbing or the colony failed and was robbed out is have a look here. You have a lot of dead bees above a queen excluder. Okay, so these bees are all bees that died trying to defend those honey chambers, and the whole colony got robbed out. So you can even look below here, and I wonder why this colony got robbed out and the others didn't, right? So let's have a peek and look at what was the condition of this hive before it got robbed. Well, I can tell you right now, it had a laying worker. So this colony was a weak colony. It was not viable. And immediately I can see here a laying worker. Oh, and then look at this. Chalk brood mummy. And this poor worker, she looks like she belongs to this hive. Do you see the 2 varroa mites on her abdomen? Can you make that out? She's got 2 of them. So this whole colony was on the edge of collapse anyways. They did their best to defend themselves, but you can see all this white debris on the top of this hive. I always get pictures in the spring. You'll see this on your bottom boards after the winter. All this white debris is the chewed wax cappings that came off of the capped honey in the hive. So that's not, mold or anything to be concerned about. It's just the bees getting at the honey. So the bees have robbed this hive out. It was bad with varroa mites apparently, and it was also had a laying worker. So that's why this hive got robbed. But you can see it's typical is this kind of mush, kind of spattering of wax all over it. So this hive is gone. It's dead out. But let's go over to this hive, because this is how I've been pulling honey today with Ashley in the field all day today. Well, all morning, I guess, is we were doing, going through the smaller hives, because this is the third pull for a lot of these, so there's not big supers on. Some of them I didn't even bother putting a queen excluder, like this one. And so I already have them on bottom boards that are converted, so they're restricted or they don't even exist. And then they're able to defend their colonies much better so that robbing isn't a variable. So I've got my smoker lit, because fall beekeeping is bad for wasps as well as bad for bees that don't want their food resources to be looted. So I do what I always do. I inspect from the bottom up. So I'm going to take my lid, turn it on upside down. Now this doesn't have a queen excluder on, so I'm always checking my lid to see if the queen is on the lid, because that's how you make sure you don't really screw up your winter season. Sending your bees into winter without a queen is a great way for a colony to fail. And then I'm just going to tip all the way to the bottom. So I take the upper box, tip it. It feels light, but it is robust in bees, right? We got a big, nice colony here. Nice cluster size, I'm sure, for winter. And what I'm doing in this final pull is I'm checking to make sure they have enough food for winter. So I am making sure that there's any frames that don't have brood in them, that the queen isn't laying out into, are backfilled with honey. So I'm just going to set this like that. And I'm making sure, A, that they're queen right, and B, if I was sampling for varroa mites today, this is when I would take my last varroa mite sample of the season. So I would be going in, looking for open brood with lots of young bees on the frame, so a newly hatched frame maybe in the last day or two. And I would shake this into a tote or a little tub, and then I would take half a cup of those bees in that tote or tub, and then I would put them inside an alcohol wash. You can use windshield washing fluid. I like to use white gas. Soapy water also works. And yeah, you kill them, but then you get your mite count. And the goal is that you do a half a cup is 300 bees. You're aiming for less than 8 mites, giving you a ratio of less than 3% of your mite count. And then if your mite count is over that, then you can start making decisions about your integrated pest management. Are you going to treat? Are you not going to treat? What are you going to do? So I'm having a peek here. The big thing I'm looking for is eggs. I'm not even looking for a queen. I see lots of eggs in here. So I know I'm brood right, that I'm queen right. And I'm looking for what I said earlier, 7 frames of brood. So I want to make sure that they have a nice winter cluster. So far we've got 1 frame of brood, 2, 3, and this is just in the medium box. Okay, excuse me, little ladies. 4, 5, because I can see in the one on the bottom here. So let's have a peek over on the other side. 6. 7. Let's see if we queen spot. I feel like we're getting close to her. I'm seeing frame cells that are hatched out. Yeah, this is a nice frame space for eggs and larvae. So this is 8 or 9. Lots of eggs and larvae in this beautiful frame. So we've got a nice healthy cluster size going into winter. So I know that this colony, if all goes well with their health, they've got lots of bees to keep those young nurse bees tending to the brood when they start brood rearing in February. So that's the goal, right? Is we want to make sure that they're brood rearing in February and there's a big enough cluster to keep that brood up to 32 degrees Celsius, and it could be minus 30 outside in February, right? So we want to make sure that they're not only healthy this time of year, but that their colony has enough bees. So now I'm checking this chamber, and I want to make sure Is there enough honey in it? And I can tell you right now, from lifting it, there isn't. Okay? And this is where this third box is going to come into handy. So we're always kind of working our way down. So if I had found lots of honey in the bottom box and not a lot of room for the brood, I would have switched it. So this frame, even though it's got honey on the one side, it's empty on the other. So this frame is not going into winter with this colony. Even though I'm going to feed with syrup, I'm going to provide insurance to my colonies, make sure they have more than enough food. I am not going to, I like having everything jammed nice and tight at winter weight now, and then the syrup I provide for them is basically the weight that they'll consume between now and when the first snow sticks. So I don't want them eating their own food resources between now and the first snow sticks, because that could be November. And by the time November comes, it's too late for me to liquid feed. It's kind of late for them to be light, right? So I want to make sure that they have lots of food for winter. So this is a beautiful frame for winter. This is great. It's uncapped, but that doesn't matter if the moisture content's good. And you can see here, it's heavy with honey. Good. So I know I'm going to take one full frame of honey out of the upper box that I have up here. I'm going to keep going through. Let's have a look. Another nice, beautiful, heavy honey frame. So these are all here from when I compressed the last time I was in the hive. I'd always try and make sure that the second chamber, if there's brood below, honey at the second chamber, and room to grow. So we've got hatching brood in this box and some eggs. So we do have brood in this box. That's why it's light. Okay, so we've got one brood frame, so an even bigger cluster than I thought. But there's no honey below, so I can't even compress this brood into the bottom box right now, right? So I'm not even going to bother. Another frame of brood. So now we're at 11 frames of brood in this colony. This is going to be a really big, cozy winter cluster in the winter. I'm excited for this colony. And a lot of my colonies do look pretty big right now. Compressing can kind of feel messy. 12 frames of medium frames of brood. Okay. Excuse me, ladies. There you go, 13, a little splash of brood amongst the pollen. And pollen stores are essential for winter survival and spring buildup. So you want to see lots of pollen. And then this, a beautiful frame of honey. And then another pretty frame of honey next. And then just making sure everything's heavy, because I don't want to leave any empty space unless it has brood. And then here we go. This one looks pretty empty on this side. It's not very full. And this side is full. So we're going to remove these two frames. And you saw I just gave them a quick shake. And then now I'm going to go into this box. And we're going to look, A, to see if there's no brood in here, because I didn't have a queen excluder. And B, see if there's any excess honey. If there isn't, I've got honey from other hives in the back of the truck. Ah, look at more brood. So we're going to make sure that we have space for the brood in down below here. So I'm going to make sure I move this over, because these were honey frames before. I want the brood all consolidated together, because you can tell that the brood nest in this colony is this big tower, and I'm now making it into an egg-shaped ball. So I want to make sure all the brood is in the same general region so that the nurse bees can tend them, and also that the heat can be regulated. And you saw that frame, it doesn't have a foundation. So you can use foundation or go foundationless. It's totally up to you. I kind of mix and match. I like having foundationless frames too. I like having the bees have the opportunity to choose what they want to do with their days. So we've got more eggs and brood. Geez, we are over 15 frames of brood. So when you're at a strong colony size like this, what you're kind of going to be running into is syrup feeding. You're going to want to make sure that you are feeding a lot, because there's going to be a lot of young bees hatching out. I'm actually going to take these honey frames out and move them up. You're going to want to make sure that you have a lot of syrup going into them, because all these new hatching bees are going to be, sorry, I meant to shake this and didn't. I haven't queen spotted yet, so I'm trying to keep everything nice and tight together. You want to make sure that they all have lots of food to eat, whether it's the syrup you're providing or backfilling with honey stores. So this one doesn't have brood in it. It's just a honey frame, so that's good. Let's have another peek. I'm looking for more brood so I can consolidate it all really nicely. No brood, just a honey frame. Okay.
Giselle is wondering if there's a minimum number of honey frames that you're looking to keep in the hive.
Yeah, so you're going to always want to hedge your bets to the maximum number of frames of honey. So if you're overwintering in a single, okay, so a single deep box, never a single medium. That's not a large enough cavity or volume for food stores in winter in Canada, or brood population cluster size for winter cluster in Canada. So I don't think you can go lower than 70 pounds. But there is an interesting variable when it comes to feed. You can winter smaller hives with less food than larger hives with less food, because it takes more time and energy for a colony to thermal regulate. So a colony of this size, where we're just running 2 mediums in the winter, I can get away with probably around 80 pounds of honey, which ends up being a full medium box jam-packed full of honey topped with syrup. Okay, but if you're going with 2 deeps, that cavity size, there's more air space and more room to thermal regulate. So the bees tend to eat more honey in the winter in order to help thermoregulate. So really it ends up being a bit more honey. So you want to aim with winter weight, including woodenware, if you're actually going to scale it, to be about 120. So it ends up being about 100 pounds of honey. And each frame averages, 8-9 pounds. So you're going to want 10 to 13 frames of deep honey in a double deep winter. You can get away with less than that, obviously, if you are running a single deep into winter, which lots of beekeepers in Alberta do, and they do it in Manitoba as well. There's brood in this frame, just in the middle. You see, it's really young brood, so part of me wonders if I'm going to turn that so the brood is facing the brood nest. So this colony right now, the way it's sitting, there's so much brood in it, there's not enough honey in here. So I'm going to make note of that inside my notes about the colonies. Every colony is going to be put on to syrup. So there will be resources stuffed into them, but I know that when the brood is hatching, that there isn't going to be really a backfilling as efficiently as it could be if I just brought a box of honey out, or had a box of honey like I'm going to leave on here, to then drop below when I compress them one last time. Okay, so it's really important you kind of aim for your standard weights for the season now than it is to aim for winter weights down the road. So aim for where you have now in resources, and if you're short, like you don't have enough honey, and this is a beautiful frame of pollen, if you don't have enough resources, then you're going to be really aggressively feeding, and maybe even considering going into winter with a fondant or a candy board or something like that. So as you can see, I'm harvesting honey. So I'm going to use the brush here in a minute, but I like to shake the bees off first, get a majority of the bees off the frames. And so I'm not taking a heap of honey off of this. So if I was to walk away, so here we go. Now I've got all the frames kind of shook off. Then I would take the lid, put it back on the colony. Oh, here, little ladies. Okay, now I've got my colony is compressed down to a double. Now, what I like to do is, now that I've shook most of the frames off, you can see I put them on the front there because there are still bees on them. I've got an empty box. Now what I'm going to do is, this is when I start brushing. So I'm not brushing right off the bat. Bees hate being brushed, so I don't want to get a majority of the bees rolled up, especially because this ends up sticky with honey. So I'm going to take this, give it a little shake. Now I'm going to put this into the box. So So I'm actually brushing off really just a small number of bees. I like to tap it. Not all beekeepers have friendly bees, so tapping may not be an option for you. If you feel like banging a frame is dangerous, then don't do it. You can always do another stiff shake. Nice little, but a majority of the bees when I shake them down are in the hive now. So that's how I like to harvest honey. And I do it if these were full of heavy honey frames in bigger upper chambers. I do the same system no matter what. The bee escape's the best way to go, because I mean clearly that's a limited amount of labor. But I don't mind doing it this way when I'm already anticipating and planning on doing full hive inspections and checks anyways, because I want to make sure every hive in this apiary is queen right and assessing health. So I could be, you know, doing my mite washes, my mite counts, assessing what I'm seeing. Are there supersedure cells? Right? That could be a case too. There's all kinds of variables and things that happen in the fall that you may not anticipate. So are there any questions at this time?
About brood, Elise.
Yeah.
If you have less than 7 frames of brood, what are your options there?
Well, I guess the question is why? Do you have less than 7 frames of brood because everything else is packed with honey and pollen? Then I think that's okay. I would personally take a frame of honey out and put a couple of extracted frames of honey, empty comb, like wet frames that I had extracted, back into the hive in the heart of the brood nest, just to give her room to make room for those 7 frames of brood. If there's room for brood and she's not taking it, I would look at the historical history of that colony, and has it always struggled to brood rear? Because that's right there, like really I would consider combining it and pinching that queen, because there's something going on. So why is your hive less than 7 frames of brood? Is there an answer?
No, that was just my question.
Oh, this is your question. Oh, okay. Yeah, so if it's less, you need to know why. Because if they don't have room for 7 frames, then they're honey bound. They won't swarm because of it or anything, but you're missing an opportunity to making sure your February cluster looks robust. So we did this just moments ago in a hive before we came online, where I had Ashley running to the truck to get empty frames of drawn comb because the colony had superseded or something. So the whole colony was honey bound with the exception of 3 frames. I think it was 4 frames of brood. So she had to bring 3 frames of drawn comb out. And I pulled more honey out of the brood nest just so I could give her room to stretch out, to make sure she's brood rearing in a robust way. And I also don't want them to be too clogged up when I start syrup feeding, because I'm using inverted top pails, those upside down buckets. And I want to make sure that when I give them those buckets, it's additional feed, it's not congestive. Because I don't want them to get swamped and then they're them being honey bound or feed bound, and then they can't actually have winter bee production taking place. So that's it. That's pulling honey. I'm sure I made it look a lot less stressful than your experience. The big thing is using smoke. Large colonies, compressing them down can be really overwhelming. There'll be bees all over the grass. Being organized, thinking about your process before you do it, so that you know step 1 is where's my smoker, where's my hive tool. Step 2, where's the empty box I'm brushing bees off, or I'm shaking bees off, putting them into an empty box covered with a sheet. So Ashley can show you the back of my truck right now. So we always have a field sheet. This one's just a really cute teeny bopper one. And what we do is we make sure, because even with the sheet on, look at these bees. Look at all these robbers. So we make sure that we make it harder for them to sneak in and come home with us. But it also decreases robbing and issues with wasps. And you don't want your bees getting frenzied, because once you leave the yard with the honey frenzy, they're going to start drifting into other colonies and they can start going to war with each other. So you always want to be responsible. So a nice bed sheet, tablecloth, something like that really works to help decrease the amount of aromatic honey that's in the air to lure in robbing. Okay. Well, any questions before we wrap up for the day?
No questions, but if you're watching after the fact, after the live, because we will be reposting this later, feel free to leave your questions in the comments and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, please do. Well, have a good fall, a good harvest. Take the free course on our website if you need any help. And always, always message us, contact us, email us if you have any questions pertaining to your special situation, because we want to see your hives go into winter thriving so that you can have nice boiling over colonies in the spring. But take care.